What the hell is all this crap? Where am I? Oh my God. Okay, hold on. What is this shit? Who are you people? Oh, no, you're not going to record this lecture. You're going to get me in trouble. Oh my God, just 1 second. I need a drink. Oh, Jesus. Sorry. Okay. Hey, wait. Okay. I met your teacher on the weekend over Halloween. He's a piece of shit. So I put him in another dimension with my portal gun. And now I'm going to teach this stupid lecture. Okay, hold on. Oh, okay. Let's see here. Oh, something peaceful. I need a background here. No. Yeah, there we go. This is Hawaii, right? Okay. What is this place? Who would live in this apartment? This place is a piece of shit. Doesn't matter. Okay. I have to. I don't even know how to work this stupid computer anymore. None. Blur. There. Perfect. You can't see my amazing hair. I'm in your stupid teacher's apartment. It's a piece of crap. I don't mind telling you. He told me that you. He told me you already learned about Kantian ethics. Kant was an idiot. And now I have to teach about political philosophy, politics. Let me give you my hot take on politics. All politicians are idiots. They just sit around. Talking about justice and equal rights, but really all they're trying to do is make money and just manipulate the masses and just extract as much resources as possible to line their offshore bank accounts. That's all politics is. It's over. The lecture's over. Okay, fine. It's not over. We have to actually have a conversation about this. Okay, so, when we do political philosophy, yes, Rick Sanchez teaching political philosophy, deal with it. So, sometimes when philosophers try to talk about politics, they talk about it in different ways. But today, we're going to ask one silly question. Who gets the toys? That's it. When you have governments form these groups and then they sit around and they talk about how much money they should steal from you. And they call it taxes. And some people think that's a bad thing and some people think it's a good thing. So today we're going to talk about two philosophers, two. One's name's John Rawls. John Rawls was a liberal philosopher. And then maybe today, but probably on Wednesday, if I decide to let your stupid teacher back, you'll learn about Robert Nozick. He was a libertarian philosopher. He didn't think that the government should take any of your money. It's not allowed for him. Okay, so political philosophy. I hate politics. It's fine. Okay, so we're gonna get started. We're gonna think about two questions now. All right, John Rawls, very famous philosopher, wrote a book called The Theory of Justice. It sucked, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So, theory of justice says that basically, if we reason in a very specific hypothetical way, that everyone will come to the same conclusion about how society should be organized. And there will be the wrong answer, but it's the best answer we can come up with right now because we're all a bunch of idiots. And he thinks that when we reason in this way, that we will all come to the same understanding of what justice is. And that justice is just being fair. Justice is fairness. That we should just treat everybody fairly. I don't know what that means, but we're going to try and figure it out. Okay, so there's a big long quote on this stupid handout your professor gave me. I can't believe I'm reading this shit. Okay, here we go. It says, let us assume to fix ideas that a society is more or less a self-sufficient association of persons who in their relations to one another recognize certain rules of conduct as binding. Yes, here's a rule of conduct that's binding. Do what I say. Okay, now, for the most part, we live in accordance with them. Maybe. I don't know about that part. That sounds kind of stupid to me. We'll see. We'll keep going. We're going to keep going. Okay, suppose further that these rules specify a system of cooperation. Yes, the system of cooperation in which you all do exactly what I tell you. And you don't question it. Okay, now, this system of cooperation is designed to advance the good of those who take part in it. Yeah, right. I've never heard such a load of crap in my life. Okay, let's keep going. John Rawls, lots to teach us here. Really deep philosopher. Okay, so then, although a society is a cooperative venture for mutual advantage. Suckers. Okay. Yeah, A society is a cooperative venture for mutual advantage. It is typically marked by a conflict, no shit, as well by an identity of interests, if you say so. There is an identity of interest since social cooperation makes possible a better life for all than any would have if each were to live on their own. I don't know, I live alone in the multiverse and it seems to be working out pretty good for me. Anyways, there is a conflict of interest since persons are not indifferent to how the greater benefits produced by their collaboration are distributed. For in order to pursue their ends, they each prefer a larger to a lesser share. Yes, of course, everyone who works hard wants more for what they've done. Yes, okay, fair enough. Therefore, a set of principles is required for choosing among the various social arrangements which determine the division of advantages and for underwriting an agreement on the proper distributive shares. These principles are the principles of social justice. They provide a way of assigning rights and duties in the basic institutions of society, and they define the appropriate distribution of the benefits and burdens of social cooperation. I feel like I'm going to throw up. Oh my God. People write entire books like this. This is unbelievable. No wonder everyone hates moral philosophers. Okay, some key points here for you to consider. First, this is a theory that is clearly working on principles. That is, the society that we're thinking about is a well-functioning society. And we live in a piece of shit society, obviously. So he's doing something that we call in political philosophy ideal theory. He's trying to think about how we should use first principles to think about ideal theory, the ideal society in which we would like to live. First thing to keep in mind. Okay, the second thing, he thinks that this idea of an ideal society will be defined by individuals who are self-sufficient, which is perhaps a ridiculous assumption because none of us are self-sufficient. We are all of us dependent on all sorts of things, like my flask. Okay, and he also assumes that people obey the rules, which they obviously don't. So you have to recognize that what he's talking about here is a magical fairyland that has nothing to do with reality. But there's a school of thinking of which Rawls is the champion that says that we have to think about the ideal case in order to give ourselves normative constraints on how to deal with the imperfect normal reality in which we're living. So the ideal theory is there to give us guidance for how to live in the crap world that's real. Does that make sense to you? You understand what I'm talking about? Yeah, sure you do. Okay, so we need principles. Okay, and the second thing is that there is an identity of interest through cooperative endeavor and a conflict of interest because of the differential entitlement to shares. What the hell does that mean? Why can't these philosophers just write in a way that makes sense? What he's talking about here is that all of us want to live our best life. And because we want that, we all have an identity of interest. We're all interested in the same thing, which is to numb the pain through radical consumption of substances and interdimensional travel. Right. And the conflict of interest comes from the fact that we have disagreements over who should get what. Obviously, I should have everything I want, and I don't care what happens to any of you. But you clearly think the same. So there's a conflict there. So there's both an identity of interest and a conflict of interest. And so Rawls will say that what we need is principles. Principles that will help us address the second point in light of the first. And his solution to this problem, the solution that he poses, is what he calls justice as fairness. Sounds like a crock to me, but let's get into it. Okay, justice is fairness. The search for principles of maximal generality, which means they apply to the most number of people possible. Okay, and at the same time, maximally specific applicability, and every rational person should endorse these principles from a place of impartial reflection. So what he's going to do is he's going to try and get you to agree on some principles. We're going to agree on some principles, and the principles will have maximal generality and maximal specificity. And then we will arrive at these principles through a hypothetical thought experiment that will get us to subtract and bracket out all of our commitments, all of our ordinary, regular understandings of our lives, so that we can get a perfectly clear ideal theory about distributive justice. I see that a lot of you are trying to talk in the chat window. I don't care. I'm not going to answer any of your questions right now. too drunk. Deal with it. Okay, so, okay, so drunk. Okay, now, here's a quote from a stupid book that you read. He says, this is the middle of the second page in your handout if you even care to follow along. Bunch of idiots. Okay, they are the principles that free and rational persons, give me a goddamn break, are concerned to further their own interests, and those principles they would accept in an initial position of equality as defining the fundamental terms of their association. Okay, and these principles are to regulate all further agreements. They specify the kinds of social cooperation that can be entered into and the forms of government that can be established. This way of regarding the principle of justice, I call justice as fairness. Okay, so one big problem here is that he thinks that the best place to start theorizing about the political is from a place of equality. And he also thinks that we should reason about principles of justice from a place of impartial reflection. Here's a problem. We're all a bunch of partial pieces of shit, aren't we? We're all biased. We're all just wrapped up in our own little lives as if what we do is important, as if our own fragile little egos matter at all to the infinite waste of space. It was a rough weekend. It's fine. So how do we solve this problem? How do we reason clearly about distribution of shares in a society if everyone's partial and biased and wrapped up in their own point of view? His answer is that we will articulate an appropriately unbiased starting point for rational deliberation about the principles of justice. And he calls this the original position. What an original title. Wow, so creative. Fantastic. Okay, so the original position, what the hell does that mean? Well, what it means is basically, it's a hypothetical perspective from which one reasons so as to endorse or reject principles of justice that would be implemented in a society. That wasn't very informative. Okay, here's one way of thinking about it. It's like a thought experiment, okay? It's a thought experiment, like a science experiment, but in your mind. And what we do with this thought experiment is it helps us to articulate the principles of justice over and against the kinds of principles we would tend to endorse from a position of knowing our own dispositions and positions and biases in society. Have you ever noticed that rich people really don't want to have taxes? Have you ever noticed that poor people really think that social welfare is important? Why do you think that is? Because they're being impartial? Of course not. Poor people don't have anything, so they want the government to give them things so that they can eat food. Rich people already have everything that they want, so they don't want the government to come and take it away. So it should be no surprise at all, that rich people who have a lot of money, when they vote in elections, they tend to vote for the politicians who don't want to take money out of their pockets with taxes. And it should be no surprise that poor people tend to vote overwhelmingly in favor of politicians who want to increase the strength of the social welfare programming that will allow them to get the resources they need because they're already financially disenfranchised. This is what it means to be biased, that you're already making decisions and the choices that you make are structured by a form of life that you're just already in. So if we want to understand what it means to do political philosophy from a place of impartial reflection, we have to have a way of reasoning that controls for these biases, that takes into account that people tend to reason on the basis of their experience. Does this make sense? You understand what I'm talking about? Yeah, sure you do. Okay, so what is he talking about here? Here's a passage from a part of this crappy book that you didn't even read because it wasn't assigned to you because you don't understand it anyway, so it doesn't matter. I'll explain it to you. Bunch of idiots. Okay, now consider the point of view of anyone in the original position. There is no way for this person to win special advantages for themselves. Nor, on the other hand, are there grounds for their acquiescing in special disadvantages. Since it is not reasonable for them to expect more than an equal share in the division of social primary goods, and since it is not rational for them to agree to less the sensible thing is to acknowledge as the first step a principle of justice, requiring an equal distribution. Indeed, this principle is so obvious given the symmetry of the parties that it will occur to everyone immediately. Thus, the parties start with the principle of requiring equal basic liberties for all, as well as fair equality of opportunity and equal division of income and wealth. Okay, what the hell is he talking about? What does he mean? What he means is that if you were in a room with a bunch of people and you were deciding how to build a society and you didn't know where you were going to be in it, you didn't know how much money you were going to have, then you would immediately want to have everything be equal. That equality is the starting point of impartial reflection between what we all owe each other and what we're all entitled to. That no one is more important than anyone else, except for me. I'm more important than all of you. It's really important that you recognize this. Okay, so here are some assumptions, really problematic, stupid assumptions built into this theory. Okay, the first is that the people in this position are rational. People aren't rational, they're maniacs. People don't reason clearly. People reason on the basis of their appetites and feverishly pursue their own desires until they're dead. So you might think that any position that tries to assume that the members of a society are all rational agents is a problematic one. Even so, this is a basic presupposition of Rawls's line of reasoning, because he wants you to think about what the ideal society would be. And even though it's true that most people aren't that rational, because we're all just a bunch of fevered egos trying to desperately keep food in our stomachs and alcohol in our bellies, ultimately, if we're trying to theorize about the nature of reality, we should try and do so from an ideal perspective, so it's something we can aspire to. Okay, another assumption at work in this idea is that the people in the original position know that goods are scarce, but not radically so. There's only so much to go around. So if you were going to build a society with only so much to go around, and you didn't know where you were going to be in that society, you would want there to be a relatively equal distribution of the goods. That's another basic assumption of the work. And third, the people desire the maximum amount of primary goods that they can get for themselves and their families. I want the best for myself and my family. Everyone wants that. That's a natural desire for everyone to have. I want what's best for me. I want what's best for my family. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. How can we establish this? Rawls calls this the veil of ignorance. You should be very familiar with it because you're all ignorant. It's a really easy thought experiment to understand. Basically, this is the means by which the perspective of the original position can be occupied for the purposes of engaging in practical reasoning about moral justice. So we stipulate, for the sake of this example, that people in the original position are behind a veil of ignorance. What that means is that the people don't know. People in the original position, they don't know. They don't know anything about where they're going to be in the society. So some of the things they don't know. Imagine that you were trying to make a decision about how to build the world, but you didn't know what your social position would be. You don't know how much money you're going to have. You don't know how good your family is, what your status will be. You don't know any of that. You don't know what your bodily features would be. You don't know if you're going to be devastatingly handsome like me or absurdly ugly. You don't know what your aesthetic features will be like and therefore how you'll be seen by others. You don't know what your social capital will be. You don't know what your talents or aptitudes will be. You don't know if you're going to be a literal omniscient genius like me or an idiot. I have a good bet, though, on what you'll be. You don't know what your religious or metaphysical views will be. You don't know what your moral and social commitments will be. You don't know what your sex or ethnicity will be, what generation you'll be born into. If you didn't know any of that, what kind of world would you want to live in? That's the question he's asking. That's the question. If you didn't know any of these things, what world would you want? Rawls says the following. He says, regarding people engaging in reasoning about principles of distributive justice in the original position, he says, they do not know. They do not know how the various alternatives will affect their own particular case, and they are obligated to evaluate principles solely on the basis of general considerations. The parties have no basis for bargaining in the usual sense because they don't know what their position will be, so they have no leverage. They all have radically equal standing in the decision-making process for who will get what. No one knows their situation in society, nor their natural assets, and therefore no one is in a position to tailor principles to their advantage. If you don't know anything particular about the form of life you'll live in a society, you're not in a position to sneak in the back door some privileged principle that would serve your interests. Think about the rich person who tries to argue on principle that the government shouldn't take taxes from us. Are they really being objective? Of course not. They just want their money. And a person who's poor and has very little very little resources and says, you know, on principles of distributive justice, we should have a very strong social net. Are they reasoning objectively? Of course not. They're reasoning on the basis of need. So Rawls is trying to eliminate this kind of reasoning from our thinking so that we can theorize without the burden of the biases that are inherent in any committed form of life that a person is living. Do you understand? I bet you do. Okay. The contrast here between the veil of ignorance is the veil of privilege. This is what I've been talking about. This is why when upper middle class racist uncles always talk about the justice of taxes being wrong, they're idiots, because all they want is to protect their own interests because they've lived a form of life that's given them certain advantages, and they're trying to protect those advantages, and they're trying to protect those advantages by reasoning in a way that looks like it's principle, but really it's just serving selfish interests. And Rawls is saying we can't theorize adequately about distributive justice unless we control for these kinds of idiots. And that's what he's trying to do in the original position behind the veil of ignorance. Does everyone understand? Does anyone have any questions at this point? You can ask a question now if you want. I've been talking for a long time. My face hurts. You figured it all out. You all understood completely. You don't have any questions. It's all just perfectly transparent and salient to your mind. Wouldn't you like to know what's in my goddamn flask? None of your business. Okay. Does anyone have any real questions? No, nothing. It's all clear. It's all just perfectly clear. Everyone's completely understood Rawls' theory of justice. Fantastic. I'm going to keep going. How much longer is this lecture? Another, oh my God. Oh my God. It says there's another half an hour in this lecture. I might not last that long. It's fine. It's fine. What's happening? This computer's a piece of shit. Okay. All right. Now, here's the basic statement. Basic statement of Rawls' position. Okay, basic statement. Top of page 4 of your handout if you're following along. Okay, the basic statement. All social values, liberty and opportunity, income and wealth, and the social basis of self-respect are to be distributed equally unless an unequal distribution of any or all of these values is to everyone's advantage. This is actually a really great idea. It embodies two principles. The first is the principle of equality. The principle of equality says that each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive scheme of equal and basic liberties compatible with a similar scheme of liberties for others. And the second is the principle of inequality, which says social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both reasonable, expected to be at everyone's advantage, and attached to positions of office open to all. He's not a communist. He doesn't think that everyone should be the same in society. He just means that what he thinks is that if there are going to be inequalities, those inequalities should not result in there being a lack of benefit for others. So if I have a higher position in society, it shouldn't be so high that other people live like shit. That's not okay. He thinks that the bottom of the ladder must always be at a certain level so that any distribution of goods that creates inequality in this society is to everyone's benefit. So you might think that a brilliant scientist like me should be given more than a bunch of idiots like you. But that doesn't mean that you, just because you're a bunch of idiots, should live a terrible, downtrodden life without any access to resources. It doesn't mean you should struggle for food. It doesn't mean that you should struggle to keep the lights on in your house. That's absurd. So for example, if you live in a world where someone has so much resources that they can go to space for fun by using the money that they've accumulated to build technology and to do so on the backs of millions of other people who live like shit in their shadow, that's not a just distribution of resources. So the idea is that equality is the rule and that any inequalities must be indexed to the benefits accrued to all members of the society. So it can't be so unequal. It can't be so unequal that some people go without. So imagine a pizza. Imagine a pizza. And imagine there are 5 people in the room who are going to share the pizza. And the 5 people in the room represent all the human beings on the planet. And the pizza, which has 10 slices, represents all the resources that need to be distributed in the society. Okay? Now, imagine if one person ate 8 pieces. That person's a piece of shit. Now, imagine that all you need to survive and be okay is 1 piece. That means that there's enough pizza. If you split half the pizza and give 1 slice of pizza to everybody, then everyone will be okay. But there'd still be 5 more pieces. So you can give 1 piece to everyone so everyone's okay. And then you can compete like animals for the other 5 pieces. So he's not saying we can't compete. He's not saying that the people who are excellent and smarter and better and more apt than others who have skills shouldn't be rewarded for their skills. He's just saying that you can't eat the whole goddamn planet. You can't eat the whole planet. You can only eat as much of the planet as is fair so that other people can have some too and be okay. That's the rule. It's not a crazy rule. It's a reasonable rule. Do you get it? Do you understand? Did the pizza analogy help? Okay. So always the rule is just eat your fair share of the pizza. And then once everyone's had their share of the pizza, then you can go back for seconds. It's fine. Just enjoy your pizza, but not so much that no one else gets any pizza. Who does that? It's ridiculous. These principles, the principles of equality and the principles of inequality, what they do is they rule out justifying institutions on the grounds that the hardships of some are offset by the greater good of the aggregate. What he means is he's trying to build principles that avoid the pitfalls of consequentialists who think that the end result can justify the means, that individuals can live like crap as long as the society is progressing as a whole. No, the society is composed of its individuals, which means the goods accrued to society must benefit even the lowest member of the society. And there's no way that you can build a just society unless the lowest rung of the ladder is at a level that you would be willing to accept. That's the point of the veil of ignorance. If you didn't know where you were going to end up in a society that you were helping to build, you would want the lowest possible rung of that society to be something you could tolerate. Because what if you get put into that rung? What if you get born into that situation? What if you are part of the level of society where you have to really struggle? Rawls's point is that we could have all been that way. You might have been born into that situation. So if you're making a theory of what the ideal society is like, the ideal society will be one where the individuals who are at the lowest possible rung, those are the ones living a good life, that the bottom rung is okay. And that the benefits accrue to those at the top of the ladder. Those are distributed in a way that don't infringe upon the benefits that are taken at the bottom rung. Does that make sense? Okay, good.
Rick, I have a question.
Beg your pardon?
I have a question.
What's your question?
How do we determine the objective metric for the bottom line below which it wouldn't be okay for the lowest class people to live? Like, how does Rawls determine that bare minimum living in society?
He doesn't specify it exactly. The point is not to give a concrete analysis of what that looks like. It's to articulate the principles that we would all agree on as rational decision makers about what we would want to build. Okay, so the idea is more like, what kind of life would you be willing to live? So it's a principle. It's not a cake recipe for how to make a cake. It's a principle for how to design a cake recipe. The theory is operating at another level of abstraction. He's not yet doing first order political thought. What the hell is happening? Doesn't matter. My computer's being weird. He's trying to give you an analysis of the principles that would go into designing a cake recipe for building a society. He's not trying to tell you how to build a society. So he's not trying to answer the question of like whether or not it's okay to have food stamps. Taylor, what's your question?
I just wanted to say something to Chase's question really briefly, which I think, Professor, would you agree that Rawls would think that people should have the amount of resources necessary to pursue their own ends?
Yes, of course.
So then that might be a benchmark for Rawls.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. He believes that the individual is the basic unit in society, and so we have to make sure that the basic unit of society is a rational agent, is someone who is able to pursue their own ends. He's definitely coming out of this Kantian tradition that understands the basic unit of political and ethical meaning to be a rational agent. That's an excellent question. I'm so surprised. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Let's see here. Still a while to go. God damn it. Okay. Okay. So the question we have to ask now, where are we? Yes. Let's think about this as an argument. Let's put this into an argument. Arguments are great. Isn't that what you philosophers do? You make arguments. Okay. Here's an argument for you. Bunch of stupid philosophers. It's fine. It's fine. Here's the first argument. It's at the bottom of page 4 on your handout. It says, okay, there's a bunch of numbers. The first one says, those in the original position know that goods are scarce and that people aren't infinitely benevolent. We all have limits to our compassion, don't we? Yes, we do. Okay, second premise. All these individuals want to maximize their primary goods. I want food, I want clothes, I want shelter, I want an interdimensional cable, I want a portal gun. Okay. But they don't know what place they'll occupy in the society they're to form. They don't know where they're going to be. That's the veil of ignorance. If one is rational and doesn't know what place they'll occupy in a society, then one will assume the following rule of rational choice. This is what he calls the maximin rule. The maximin rule says that when one is in a position of uncertainty, one should choose one's principles and actions so as to maximize one's minimum prospects. If I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, I want to make peace with the worst possible scenario. That's the idea. It's to be, can you reason on the basis of being content, or at least able to tolerate the worst possible eventuality? This is the maximin principle. I want to maximize my lowest prospects. And if I do that, then no matter what happens, I'll be okay. Do you understand? Does that make sense? Maximize your lowest experiences.
Yeah, can you elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So if you're uncertain, if you don't know what's going to happen, if you don't know where you're going to end up, then you should choose principles and actions that maximize your minimum prospects. This is like a rational insurance policy for the worst possible scenario. If you don't know what's going to happen, reason and act in a way where the worst possible eventuality is something that you're trying to improve on. Maybe you'll get lucky and you'll win the lottery tomorrow, but if you don't, maybe you should save some of your paycheck. Oh, yeah. Do you understand? Excellent.
It's like just prepare for the worst, like hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
Don't hope for the best. Hope is for idiots. Prepare for the worst. Strive for the best. Work hard, but always do so in a way where you're maximizing the bottom line so that you're not going to be screwed. Those are the same principles that we should use to build a society. The fifth premise is that if one reasons in accord with the maximin rule, then they will select Rawls's true principles of equality and inequality. Why? Why should we believe that? Because those are the two principles that maximize the minimum outcome. Everyone is equal, and all inequalities that arise as a result of difference do not accrue demerit to the lowest common denominator, to the lowest rung of the ladder. The person at the bottom of the society cannot be disenfranchised by inequalities accrued by those at the top of the society. It doesn't mean those at the top of the society don't get more. They do get more. But they don't get more at the expense of those at the bottom of the society. Therefore, subjects in the original position will select Rawls's two principles. That's the conclusion. That's the conclusion. Oh, what time is it? Okay. We have 15 minutes left. 15 minutes. This insanity. Okay. So, some criticisms. We're going to do some criticisms of Rawls now because he was an idiot. I'm just going to destroy his theory now. Just completely tear it apart with objections. Okay. Here's the criticisms of Rawls' conception of justice. The original position is incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. Even if Rawls is right about how people in the original position would reason, why should we care? It's not what the world is like. After all, we aren't in the original position. We know our social position. We know what we look like. We know what our talents and aptitudes are. And we know what our sex and ethnicity and religious commitments are. We know all these things. So aren't facts about these, at least some of these facts, some of these features, aren't they just relevant? Aren't they just super relevant about how things should go? Shouldn't I know the facts about my life, be able to make a decision about what's relevant for me? Whether I work hard, whether I belong to certain ethnic groups, aren't these relevant to matters of justice? Does they matter? Of course they matter. Here's Rawls' reply. Rawls has a reply. His reply is something like this. The veil of ignorance gives voice to our strong sense that features over which persons have no control should not unduly influence their life prospects. Contingent facts about us should impact our capacity to maximize our lives, but not to decrease the minimum available to everyone. So his point is something like this. Of course, the contingent facts about who you are as a person are relevant to what you're capable of getting in this world and what you're capable of achieving in this world. That's why he thinks that these contingent facts should have an impact on our ability to maximize our lives, but they shouldn't have an impact to decrease the minimum available to everyone. That has nothing to do with contingent features of individuals. Every individual is a member of the society. So we should have principles that accept that fact. And all the inequalities that accrue because of the differences between us are fine, but not if they minimize the standards of living that are available to everyone. If you're so smart that you make a company that the entire world comes to depend on, that doesn't give you the right to live in a way that disenfranchises the lives of other people. If your work doesn't lift other people up, then you're just a piece of shit, aren't you? Okay, does everyone understand the objection and the reply? Does anyone have any questions? Okay, then I'm going to do the second objection. People don't reason the way Rawls thinks they do. Rawls' conception of how people actually reason is wrong. Even if the veil of ignorance is a legitimate device, how sure can we be that free and equal moral persons would reason in accord with the maxi-min rule? Isn't he assuming that individuals are irrationally risk-averse? So for example, consider the alternative rule, this alternative rule of rational choice, a different rule from the maxi-min rule. Consider this rule, where n, the variable n, is the number of people in the society for which I'm selecting principles. And I will choose a principle of justice that maximizes the primary goods I will have, given that I have a 1 in n chance of being anyone in the society. Isn't that a more plausible principle? A principle that's indexed to the actual numbers and distribution of individuals in a society. Rawls' reply says, the person choosing has a conception of the good, such that he cares very little, if anything, for what he might gain above the minimum stipend that he can, in fact, be sure by following the maximum rule. It's not worthwhile for him to take a chance for the sake of further advantage, especially when it may turn out that he loses much that is important to him. Rawls' reply is basically to say, why would you reason on the basis of risking living a terrible life when you could simply embrace principles that would allow everyone to live a good life? There's no point in risking your life if you can just live according to principles that allow everyone to live a minimum that is acceptable, that is okay. Okay, one more objection. From an egalitarian perspective, Rawls' theory places a presumption on equality, but is willing to tolerate inequalities. Why shouldn't strict equality be the standard? Because he's not a communist. He believes that there should be inequalities that accrue to us on the basis of the differences that we have between us. Some people are more capable than others. Some people contribute more to others, and they should be rewarded for that. But any avenue that leads to inequality in the society should be through offices and institutions that are open to everybody. And no inequality that accrues in a society on the basis of individual aptitude should happen to such a degree and with such proportion that those at the bottom of the society suffer. All inequalities must benefit the entire society. That's the principle. Okay, There's one more objection. It's the objection of Robert knows it, but I'm not going to talk about it because it's too complicated. And you're going to spend the entire next class talking about it with your stupid professor when I bring him back from another dimension. Okay. I have nothing more to say to any of you. I'm exhausted. I can't believe I did this. Does anyone have any questions? No questions, nothing. Everyone's just perfectly clear. Fine. Fine. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. That was a lie. I was totally annoyed the entire time. Not every day you get a chance to literally ask a super genius anything you want. But it's fine. I'm exhausted. I'm going to go pass out. All right. Happy Halloween.